Hello everyone, welcome to our today's session on modeling and estimation of risk. Myself Dr. Rakesh Agrawal, Secretary General RMAI. So today's session would be today's expert is Mr. Sridhar. So you already know him. He has taken classes before also. And one important notice regarding exams, maybe we would be scheduling the exam from next week from 10th. So we will send you an intimation for booking of this slot. So you will get an email for the details of the exam. So let's just briefly introduce Mr. Sridhar. Mr. Sridhar is an experienced banker having 30 years in banking industry in India and Africa in MNC banks. Mr. Sridhar is an enterprise risk management consultant, trainer, mentor. His key specialization areas include enterprise risk management, focus on credit and operational risk and resilience, governance and compliance, cloud computing, and cybersecurity. He has also been the Chief Risk Officer ES of Small Finance Bank. He is a regular speaker on issues on BFSI segment, on risk management, and he is also the member of Advisory Council of Risk Management Association of India. And already he has taken number of sessions. So now I'd like to hand over the session to Mr. Sridhar, and at the end we will have a question answer as we usually do. Yeah, Mr. Sridhar.
Thank you, Dr. Rakesh. Good evening, sir, and good evening to all participants. Great to meet you all on this wonderful subject, actually, modeling and estimation of risk. When Dr. Rakesh said I should talk on this subject, I was thrilled because when we started our risk management journey, as it were, in our working careers, there were not much of inputs available, but still we felt, or the risk management apparatus in many banks, at least in the MNC banks, certainly felt there were needs to have models to validate certain of our thinking on risks, particularly scenario-bound risk modeling, risk scenarios where we had an idea of what type of risks could affect or impact our businesses in what change parameters. But we had no means of validating such things until the event actually took place, and then we experienced whatever impacts our responses were, and then found out what the results were. So it was like learning by doing things and then building back onto that. So there required to be a model which you could test out in a non-live or a simulated manner to apply it on your live situations to see whether you have any statistical possibility. Because modeling is basically, what is modeling? Modeling is an abstraction of a reality. Modeling is basically, when we understand modeling, we need to understand one thing. What we're doing is we were bringing down reality to an abstraction. In risk management, we call it scenario building because we envisage such scenarios that would impact our businesses under certain conditions. So if your business is insurance, it will be different. It might directly affect you or your policyholders, and therefore it would affect you, and so on and so forth. If you are a bank, it would affect you as a bank. It would affect your customers, and therefore their ability to meet their commitments to you or whatever, and so on and so forth. So they were two-dimensional, but it was never three-dimensional. It was only two-dimensional. My own experiences or experiences of those on who my businesses were dependent. So this level of abstraction had to be more completed on the third dimension of what can happen given my data or given the set of data that is already available on many scores. And then you need to do estimation. Estimation in our risk management, we would have understood, is calculating the probability of a particular event or a frequency that could happen, and through that, the impact. What is the loss scenario and all that? What is the, impact, effect factor and all that. Now, this would is what is going to be our subject matter discussion, more of an introduction to what we're going to talk. And there are, of course, tools and techniques today readily available. Why did I give you about my story about almost 25 years, 30 years back? Because those days, these tools were more available in the academic world than in the industry. Industry slowly took time to adopt for two reasons. One, the basic reason was lack of knowledge. Nobody knew that these could be adopted, this could be applied, except for a few far-sighted leaders in the industry. And it was not, information sharing was not as great as it is today. And therefore, even if they were willing to share it, there was no means to share it, except in some symposium or seminar or presentation of a paper for academic research or whatever, which were your basic sources of knowledge, and you have to convert it to your own application levels. Applying it for your businesses in your geography, in your particular area of focus. So when it came down to that, the knowledge levels were very, very limited, or let's say were limited to a very narrow zone of academia. Today, the situation is different. So let's go ahead and look at what it is. So basically, modeling helps you in risk assessment. Assessing the risks. Why would you want to come in? Even when you say, no, I use models, there could be somebody who reacts, say, no, I use models primarily to focus on my business. I don't do it as much as for my risk, for my business. I want to know before I launch a product, or I want to relaunch a product, or whatever it is, what could be the possible impact, resistance, as it were, in market, and therefore what should I do and all this. So it has got nothing to do with risk. But what they're actually doing is they're rephrasing the risk management or assessment of the risks of the product launch or any other purpose for which they want to start it, not to fail, because you're investing a lot of time, money, management material, and so on. So whatever is our objective in looking at what can go wrong, we are actually doing a risk assessment. We are envisaging a particular risk of that particular objective, not yielding the, let's say, the final objectives of that particular initiative. And therefore, what could one or more variables that could impact it negatively from what we want to do it. And therefore, how do I find out to what extent it can? This is the scenario that you build up. Based on this scenario build up, then you try to bring in, okay, this is the product I launched in a particular market where my brand itself was not known. And therefore, I did a pre-launch campaign or whatever else that your plan did, your marketing plan or your launch plan had as components. And therefore, the results look like this. Now, if I take that result and apply it on a different market where the parameters changes, like cultural parameters being different, the color combinations of the packing material could mean completely different connotations in this market, and so on and so forth. And if I apply those to my model, what is the impact? What is the positive impact, which is very good? What is the negative impact, which is what I'm actually guarding against? And therefore, what would I need to do? And whether it is, there could be impact, the correction of which could be very costly, which is what our risk tolerance was all about in our risk assessment. So basically, when we are talking about modeling, we are using all of these techniques for looking at what we looked at in our risk assessments in our earlier thing. What did we say? Broadly, we said identifying and analyzing pure potential events for negative impacts. Positive impacts is good. That's what your marketing survey will tell you. Negative impacts, usually risk analysis. Making judgments, whether it can still be within your tolerance thing. Yes, 5% of the people that we're going to present these free samples are not going to use it or simply throw it away or not give you the feedback that you're expecting. That means you expect them to give a feedback, not a type of feedback, but basic feedback. Because based on that, you would be then able to evaluate whether your product is being, accepted in this fashion, form, whatever, packing, whatever else. Okay? And whether that is within a tolerable limit. So to make those judgments, you need your risk assessment. So it is looking at what can go wrong, how well you can estimate that portion that can go wrong, and then find out what are the costs of making sure that it is reduced to a level where you are comfortable, because there is going to be risk. We've come, as we have been always talking, as Dr. Rakesh was saying in his introduction, even in my earlier speeches in the RMA training sessions, there is nothing called zero risk. The only way not to have any risk is not to do anything, but that itself is a risk. So therefore, there is nothing called zero risk. That's been my contention. That's been my philosophy. That's been my working philosophy also. Even in my risk management consulting assignments, I tell my customers that I can never promise a zero this thing, because there is nothing called a zero risk. In everything, whether you do something or you don't do something, there is going to be a risk. And therefore, we need to be able to identify those risks, control them, and then bring it down to a level where we can live with that, tolerate it, or whatever else we want. So it's an inherent part of your broader strategy. So it definitely, even for your risk management, you need to have a particular objective. What am I trying to manage here? If it is a risk, what is the type of risk I think is going to happen here? So when you lend money, as I always say, when you lend money, it's a credit risk. But if you lend it wrongly in a wrong process, then it's an operation risk. So therefore, the risk assessment itself will have to depend on how do you correctly classify it, categorize it, so that the response actions, the response techniques would then be suitably applied so that it would meet the correct classification. So the objective should be to manage it. The strategy should be to manage it to a level, to a particular level of acceptable risks. So how does modeling and estimation help us in this? We'll see. So what is basically a model? It's a quantitative method, because a model cannot remain in abstraction. Modeling is abstraction. Model itself helps you to bring the abstraction into a quantifiable form for comparative purposes. Take out as much as possible of all the what is called the noise. In statistics, we call it noise, as most of you would already know, or the biases that could exist. Because we could look at all sorts of data and finally get lost. If there were 5 roads leading to Rome, you wouldn't know which road to take unless you were very clear what time you had, what mode of transport you had, and all that. So therefore, the choice of the responses also depended on many things. So a model is a quantitative method, as the slide reads, which again relies on assumptions and statistical, mathematical, and other functional theories. So a model has to be a conversion tool, converting your abstraction into a comparable quantity. So it has to be always a quantity. So basic, and why do we have to understand the basic approach or the construct of a model? Because we are looking at what could be the final problem that when we do a risk, we have looked at what model helps you. We just discussed it one slide before. We will also keep discussing, repeating it time and again as we go through the next 35, 40 minutes that we have. When we discuss that, you will find out, while modeling is a great tool to bring down an abstraction, help us give us, there are many benefits of modeling. That's why most of us use modeling, and that's why it's even a subject matter today for discussion. But there are certain risks with modeling itself. As I told you, doing nothing can eliminate most of the risk, but that itself will create a risk, because your money will be sitting idle, and therefore idle money doesn't earn anything. So there could be opportunity lost. So therefore, a model has to be understood correctly for us to go forward in this. So it's a process that has a lot of data inputs into that. Model essentially is a quantitative method. And the minute we talk about quantitative method, we're talking about data. Data again is further classification. Yes, you have internal data and external data. External data today is called the big data. There are enormous sources. In fact, the enormity of the source itself is a big problem with that particular type of data, managing the data, gathering the correct type of data, classifying the correct type of data that you need for applying it for the techniques that you want for the particular thing. So therefore, in my zamana, the lack of this technique was a risk. In your zamana, too many sources of data itself is a risk, because then you'll have to correctly identify the correct type of data, bring it down, extract it down, and then cleanse it, or whatever else the data managers, data scientists will call it, to make it suitable for the particular objective that you have. So model has to be understood that it is a quantitative method that relies on many assumptions, statistical and mathematical tools. One aside, probably, I would like to, in fact, in the initial, before the startup, I was just discussing with Dr. Rakesh ji, like we always do. It also helps me to sort of warm up towards a certain subject, because I just finished a class before lunch for my CISA classes, so I need to switch my hat and come back to a pure risk management from completely technology and systems audit and other things. So in that discussion with Dr. Rakesh, I was saying it's a very important thing for all risk managers to be, at least, if not be experts in statistical methods, at least have basic competencies in statistical methods. What do I mean by saying basic competencies in statistical method? A normal distribution. If somebody tells you that there are many distributions, so you would probably be happier doing it through a particular type of distribution. It should not surprise you, or it should not make you scramble down to your, Google or anything as we are talking to find out what is this guy talking about. So you should have a basic level of understanding. And if you want me to tell you further, how do you actually do it? Simple. You just go back to your 12th standard books. These are things that we have already studied during our schooling, because these are the fundamental building blocks on which we built our further, academic pursuits. So these are nothing as if they are suddenly invented today and being thrown at us. So for example, probability. Probability is something that probably in the last whatever period of your training, RMA training, you would have heard time and again and again. But I'm sure most of the other learned lecturers also would have reminded you. But basically, the minute you hear probability, you should think about a value between 0 and 1. That level of statistical awareness is what I would very strongly recommend to my younger friends who are the audience here for this particular course, trying to get themselves reinforced with a fantastic certification like RMA certification. So statistical and mathematical theories, financial theories will help, because ultimately an organization, even if it is a charitable organization, has a dollar value for everything it does. The monies it receives and the money it disperses. So somewhere there is a financial aspect or an attribute that will have to come into play at some point in time, even if your entire objective is completely altruistic. So therefore, we need to understand basic financial theories. We need to have. We might need higher and more complex theories, depending on the complexity of your objective, complexity of the model you're trying to build. Then let me tell you, there are some models that are even very difficult. Even when the experts try to demystify or break it down, decompose it, it's very, very challenging to sit down and keep a straight face saying that you understand. In fact, I have attended sessions where one single model has been explained over 3 days. Okay. And even now, I don't know. I even keep checking with my, fellow attendees in the same session. Not all of us are very comfortable that we can today put up our hand saying, yes, we understood the model. That means, apart from our own weaknesses, the model itself is so complex. So it depends from a very simple model that you can construct on an Excel sheet, and then to a very, very complex model where the algorithms can, where now machine learning and other things have come in and kicked in and completely take it to a different level. So for those things, you need these basic theories, understanding of those theories. So please make a note of this particular slide and make sure that you understand what a basic model, a construct of a model is, right? So it can be used for a tool only if you know how to use it. I mean, all of us know how to drive a car or a two-wheeler, but if I gave you an F1 formula car, the first thing you will probably, your leg will keep searching for is, the gas pedal, and these things don't exist in a formula car. Now, this is the same thing with the model. You may not have your basic tools there, but there are certain other functionalities that will give you even a greater function. So we need to understand what these tools are, for what they can use. From an investment analysis, because some of the investment analysis, as you would see later on in this same presentation, have gone seriously bad. Seriously bad because they were dependent on a particular type of model. And the model itself, the construct, was subject to very many ifs and whys, which are never answered, as we will see. So there are even tools. One of the things that we will discuss is, how do you even construct a model? A simple model, like say, okay, this is a trend analysis of a model. I use past data to look at what the trend in my sales in south of India was for a particular product during particular monsoon season or a particular agriculture season or whatever, or post-agriculture harvest season, and then use the same data to extrapolate to find out what can happen given these parameter changes. So if it is a single parameter, then what do you do? If there are multiple parameters, what are the various parameters? Where are the sources for those data? And then construct this as a simple equation on an Excel sheet. Now, what are the various things into play over this model? You know how to use an Excel sheet. You know how to write your correct formula on the Excel sheet. You know what is your company's objective or what is your objective. You know where the data sources are there. So as we start listing down the various requirements for a construct of a model, we understand that it could be a lot of dependencies on people other than a particular team of people. Not just one person, it could be. So for a data, you would go to a data scientist saying, this is what I want to do. What do you think I should be doing for data? He would give you that construct and so on and so forth. So suddenly it gets elevated from a very simple Excel sheet, which is on our laptop or on our desktop, to a seminar or a workshop sort of a situation where you are now involving 3, 4, n number of specialists that will help you construct. And therefore, their inputs will come challenging some of your concepts or validating some of your concepts. And therefore, the model evolves. So what is the model? It's a system of a quantitative method, the approach that relies on assumptions in economics, okay, statistics, mathematics, financial theories, and techniques. So this is a textbook thing. There are many different types of, definitions that you can find. It's not about which is right, which is wrong. We use one to showcase or talk about it as a talking template. That's all. Doesn't mean this is the only definition of what a model is. There would be any number of models. But all of them, almost all of them would by and large be constructed on the same way. It would be defined in a different way as we all define it in our own way. So having spent that extra 4 or 5 minutes on understanding the model, we will go into, so what is a risk model? You can have a sales model, you can have a production model, you can have any type of model. Whether the meteorological model is what we have all seen. Every day we get our input saying, tomorrow it will rain or it will not rain or whatever. So a model can be for any particular objective, as I said in the beginning. So what is a risk model? Because we're basically looking at it from a risk assessment, a tool to help us look at tools. In fact, the title itself is modeling and estimation of risk. And therefore, what is a risk model? So it's basically a mathematical representation of what a commonly incorporated probability distributions. So if you look at what is the probability of a particular event happening, if this particular variable happens, this is the probability. And so on and so forth. When you start plotting it on a graph, you would have any type of distributions for the various variables. So which is the best one to choose? So therefore, a model will help you choose that. So it uses historical data as well as expert analysis. This is what our scenario building was also talking to you even in our risk identification and risk assessment. If you go back to those classes, those experts giving you those inputs, you would remember that these things, expert elicitation is nothing but where you used your Delphi method or your structured workshop methods to bring in data or understand a particular situation from the eyes of an expert and look at how it matches or deviates from your own assessments to look at what can be accepted. So this is how we use a risk model, is where you use data, a mathematical representation. So for this, of course, you need a lot of data, a lot of relevant data. Lot of data, yes. We are now 70 years old as a country, and therefore we have 280 quarters of economic data, various levels of let us say integrity. Let's say 90% of the data is valid and 10% of the data is questionable. I will not say invalid, I will say questionable, because sources may be not validated, or sources would have simply, for want of time, people would have simply received whatever data came in and just simply plugged it onto the database. So there would be no validation or verification of the data. So let's say that's only 10%. Even 90% confidence levels of the data. Today, you have 280 data points, even if you take a quarterly sort of data for economic using. Now, 280 data points is quite enough of population, as most of you tell. But what of that data is relevant to me? Is the iron ore extraction relevant to me, where my bank is already not willing to finance a mining activity, but is going to finance a steel manufacturing activity? Yes, maybe it could be, but may not be fully. But whereas if I'm a public sector company that does only financing of mining equipment, that data could be very, very relevant, and so on and so forth. Therefore, It's a mathematical representation of the system that, commonly takes care of your probability distributions. So risk estimation, as we already seen. So once you have an estimation, then we plot it to find out what is the estimation. You can have any type of matrix. You can go, like I was telling in the previous session where I was indulging in this class. In one of my consulting assignment for one of the health corporate entities which deals with health and this thing, which basically is English for corporate hospital. Okay, they had a matrix, risk matrix, 27, squares on this thing. This is as you can see, is a 3x5 matrix. They had a 9x3 matrix. So it was a huge thing and classification because they wanted that level of finer details for a different type of thing and so on and so forth. So the estimation of risk is based on what we want to achieve. Helps us to produce what the risks are that you are being assessed. So what does it take? It takes care of duration. The duration in statistics is for the period in which it is being assessed. Okay. And intensity, which is your impact. Magnitude, which is your impact on your actual objectives. And then the potential consequences, which is your actual final results that will help. So magnitude is what you expected. The potential consequences is what can happen because of the value of the asset at that time and all that. So which you can finally bring down to, for example, in insurance, to explain this particular statement in an insurance term, is not all the insured value is what you always get back as a claim for in case of the event actually materializing. Why is this? Because there are many other variables that come into play. And therefore, it will never be more than what you insured it for. So irrespective of the value of the asset that was impacted or the value of the impact or the damage onto the asset itself, the quantifiable dollar value could be depending on very many different variables. So description of the probability at any, given this thing, impact or exposure. So during intensity, which is exactly the first bullet, description of probability that organism is exposed to specific dose, which will adverse effect, which will get a. So there are quantitative approaches. You use, statistical methods and an event tree method. People who have been in the production side or the engineering side would look at various, components of a particular input variable going bad at any given time or any given period or a frequency. That means if the life of a fan belt, for example, is only 3 months, okay, you would know it will start malfunctioning or from experience or from your product description or from your vendor warning saying that from 70 days to 90 days, it could start deteriorating in its production or in its, performance. And therefore, you would keep your replacement value somewhere between 75 to 80, depending on certain indicators and so on and so forth. So event tree analysis. If this event happens, or what is the probability of that event happen, then what is the potential impact? And then you finally come to that. Similarly, qualitative approaches, which is what we have been looking at. So in our risk assessment techniques that we have learned so far in risk management, we had both quantitative approaches, which were completely data-based, event-based, and qualitative approach where you did not have data and therefore you had to, or you do not have reliable data. So therefore you had to look at an alternative method to still perform the assessment, and therefore you called in experts and other things. So it became the same. So in the same assessment, you could have both quantitative assessment, because for your impact, you can quantify the dollar value, but for your frequency or, probability of the frequency of the event happening, you may not have data, or the data may be insufficient. Tsunami happening once in 1,000 years, no guarantee that it won't happen in the next 15 years. So the data says, okay, it happened for 1,000 years back, it happened in 2004. So when will it next hit India? It will not, you can't say by any amount of certainty it will hit what is only in 3004. So what do you do then? So for the frequency, you may have a part of a set of quantitative data. So you can even have a hybrid or what is called a semi-quantitative approach. So for various methodologies are available depending on what your objective is or what are the variables that could be, what is the availability of data, what is the reliability of the data which is available, and so on and so forth. These are the various factors that could impact on what we need to use as a technique to bring in this quantitative side of our model. So then how do you estimate the risk? Estimation is always a good evaluation. Why? Because basically, as you say, in my estimate, that means you're not sure. I am very sure. You will not use the word estimate, isn't it? You're saying, no, I know it is 14 or whatever number, right? So at the beginning or at the start of a particular thing, you only do estimates. In financial estimates, this is also called projections, and so on and so forth. Every industry has its own terminology to suit themselves. So it will require a generation of scenarios. You will have to look at different types of scenarios, saying, if this happens, this is what will happen. Okay. Microsoft, when they were launching every version, they knew where to start the launch because of their earlier data that was available. That's why they always started it closer to the dateline, if you saw. It will always be available at this thing and available in their own country late, so that by the time enough hype is already this thing. So you need generate different types of scenarios of all possible sequences. That will help. To look at what you want to do here is estimate the probability. So it can be assigned either in absolute terms or in relatively risk terms, saying if this happens, this is the probability. So that is not an absolute term. It is relative to another variable's particular type of behavior. Okay. And it should be available on all information. It means you can't have a type of data coming up which said, oh, sorry, I didn't consider this. And therefore, this is not. One very contextual estimation is always your decision review system in cricket that is very popularly used. They use every single scenario to eliminate the missing of a data before they can come to a conclusion. Right or wrong of it is different. That is application of the knowledge. But if you look at the process of that knowledge, everything, whether it is the snick edge or or your ball tracker or whatever else, these are variable sources of information for a particular decision possibility. So therefore, what has been missed out could probably impact your decision making if it is taken out if the decision is made or arrived at without that particular state of data, unless you had a particular reason to believe that that set of data is not really relevant to you. So these have to be built. And estimation of risk is always subject to one thing, the estimate not being correct. What is it subject to? If what you estimated is correct, it means you had taken all the variables to connect, all the scenarios that will play out. And finally, when you arrive at the estimate, probably whatever you took out worked out exactly the same. And here also, I am not saying that is why it worked out. I am still saying only probably. Why? Because we can't really pin it down on A, B, C unless they are the causative factors itself. So unless you are able to identify them as the causative factor of a particular outcome, the outcome will still be an estimate which went correct. And therefore, you can say, the basic, if you look at any mathematical or statistics book, probability is the same when you flip a coin, there are only two possible outcomes. So if you called head, it would be 50% chance your call will be right, 50% chance it won't be right. Why? Because one outcome of two possible outcomes. So the probability is 50% or 0.5. Right? Now, if you flip the same coin 12 times or 10 times, let's make it easier. Okay. How many times will you be able to call correctly? Now, suddenly the whole situation changes. Isn't it? The outcome is still either head or tail only, but the number of occurrences of the same thing goes up to how many? 20. So suddenly your probability of calling it correct, it comes down very drastically, isn't it? So, or if you change it the other way, okay, you take a doctor's opinion and the doctor says, yes, probably you got COVID, or Sridhar has got COVID, okay? And so the Sridhar's family says, no, let's not take this. Let's go to another doctor, right? And then have a second opinion. So what's happening here? When the second opinion also says, yes, correct, but the earlier guy was right, the readings are all correctly taken, and therefore this inference is correct. Now suddenly what has happened is, It is no longer, you're not reducing to 50% possibility to 25% possibility or a 75% conformity. It has actually moved up. If I can use a particular example that we recently used in a different context, it has gone up to as high as 91% of it being correct. So that is why a second opinion, though we use it colloquially, a second opinion can change drastically of just two possible outcomes coming into from a 50% to a 91% certainty. Now you know you don't want to take anymore. When somebody says 91% certainty, what will you do? You will probably go admit the patient immediately without further ado. So estimation of risks comes from a relative, always a subjective, value which can be driven by a particular number of variables that you introduce to it, or you already based it on. If it is correct, which will be known, even if it is correct or wrong, would be known only on the actual risk metamorphing into an event, or the event coming alive and then telling you what's happening. We will discuss this more. It's very, to reduce an abstraction into a definite science, it takes a lot of understanding the abstraction first. So you might be thinking, he has still not placed a number on the estimate. It's very difficult to place a number on the estimate, because that estimate itself would be dependent on if there will be a fine print or a sub print there that says this estimate is valid if these conditions are also prevalent, and so on and so forth. So that's why doctor prescribes a medicine for 3 days and tells you come back for a check. If he is very sure after 3 days you are going to be okay, he will tell you don't take the trouble of coming here, sit at home. Why does he not do that? Because at his estimate, given the various variables between you and another person of a same age, same gender, but different metabolic condition, the variables are changing, and so on and so forth. So this would be the incompleteness of a definition or even understanding of a estimation. The challenge is to understand that first. We have to understand that and accept that as a part of estimation first. So we could have estimate as actually an uncertainty. So if there is, even your calibration is wrong, that's what the first cartoon says. If the tailor's measurements are wrong, you would have a scarecrow type of a look. That's what it says. Now in a mass production, in a mass produced product, which is again faulty, the calibrations are faulty. You can imagine the amount of recall that will have to happen to the product, and therefore the type of losses that will happen. So estimation itself is a great problem. So this is normally we call measurement errors, assumption error. Whatever you assumed were wrong, or at least a few of them were wrong. You thought, okay, this is going to, let's take election as a milestone. You thought in this election A party will win and B party ends up winning, and their business philosophies are different, and therefore your business strategies would have to be either reworked or would have to be adjusted to fit into the revised thing. So a completely different assumption event happening outside of your own business. Nothing in your market has changed, nothing in your product has changed, but the governing body, the elected government, their philosophies, which they've been shouting from the rooftop, saying if we come into power, we will do this. We will abolish all the foreign investment, whatever, something like that. So that assumption could be wrong. Or scope. You did not scope out your objectives properly. You did not scope out. This is all the time this can happen. One of the things that we always get in a computerized employment, I'm saying you are not authorized, especially in access levels, where you thought you have access to certain type of documents, but your organization has already put you onto a negative list for that particular type of access. And you will know it only when an alert is thrown up like that. So the scope of the estimation of your problem, or your estimates for your problem, went ahead because you went and made an error. So these are the normal 3 types of estimation risks. Now, many people can come back and say, no, we have subclassifications. But if you roll up all these classifications and categorizations, it would roll up into these 3 major groups. You can, again, subdivide it into any number of sub-classifications. I again worked with another group where they had any type of estimation of risks. In fact, they had more than 100. So you could subdivide it to your convenience, to your organization convenience. But essentially, they would all come into the same bracket. Okay, they had one measurement for automated valves, then one for manually operated valves, and so on and so forth. Just to give you one thing. So manually operated valves, the measurement error had to be set in a different way, or recalibrated every way. It is like the tailor's tape. The tailor fellow hangs it on his shoulder without remembering that his sweat itself is affecting the plastic on the tape, and therefore those grains can go away, and therefore he will never be able to measure it correctly. Whereas if it is a laser measurement, as most of the mass-produced shirts in Surat and other places do, there it is laser controlled, CDCs or CNCs as they are called, and therefore the measurement error happening there, the margin of error is very, very low, and the number of errors is also very, very low. So it depends on type of measurements we use, type of measurement, let's say processes that we are assets in the process chain, that value chain that we use, and so on and so forth. So again, assumptions would depend on all of these environment. So measurement error, if there is an input variable, okay, inherent accuracy limitations. One of the, again, oft-repeated examples that I use is the, viscosity in liquid management. Most of the liquid inputs, whether they are at the, your production input or raw material stage or work in process or production stage or at finally finished good stage, okay, the accuracy limitations are dependent on not only the type of packing and other things, also the type of liquid itself. What would be the viscosity of water is not the viscosity of so on and so forth. And then the type of packing material that you use, and type of material which can reduce the viscosity, and therefore the residual value of the content in the container is not again what you can choose, because there will be government regulations that says this type of liquid or this type of acid cannot be packed in a container that is not made of this material, and so on and so forth. So there are very many variables that come into play when you're talking about measurement errors. So estimation of risk, where this is an important thing, we'll have to keep that in mind. I'm not saying that because of that our estimates are going to be wrong. Our estimates will certainly be wrong if you're not factored in these elements or these variables that will affect your particular type of business. Luckily in a bank, all these things don't expert, but in the bank, when he is lending to these units, it still will affect him. Because of those factors, if that unit is not going to perform well, his lending would come to risk. So therefore, in a very indirect manner, he would still be exposed to that sort of measurement error. Again, model error. Model error is where you use an empirical model. Last time this particular valve failed, when there was a surge in flow, or your circuit can break because it cannot take a particular level of voltage stabilization or spike in the voltage and so on and so forth. This model that you chose could be wrong, because you are applying a different model. For example, today somewhere in some other blog, somebody had written saying a car contains a stepney or a spare tire because the probability of one of the four wire tires going flat is very high, and therefore, whereas a coffee table in your house does not have a spare leg supplied, because the probability of one of the legs breaking down inside your residence is wrong, very, very low. So the furniture fellow never gives you a spare leg. Now, these look like a very nice comparison, isn't it? But the problem with this particular model is, one is a mobile model, one is a stationary model, and one requires an immediate solution for you to continue its purpose. One does not require a continuity for it. If your coffee table breaks down, you're going to put whatever you put on top of it to something else. In a car, you can't leave it. Even if you catch a bus and go away, you can't leave your car in the middle of the road. You will get charged even for that. So the mobility, it should be an empirical model that should be relevant to your objective. So if you choose a wrong model, then you will get to a conclusion like what that blog was concluding, right? So this is basically, this morning when I was reading it, I thought, okay, today probably we can use this as a good talking point to bring home what we are talking about. Here the model error is what is that empirical model that you're using to build up your measurement? What went wrong is where you're using, but you should use what can go wrong in the correct thing or relevant thing or a comparable thing. So assumption error, we make incorrect assumptions. Incorrect assumptions mostly is, agriculture, one of the reasons, one of the biggest struggle in India is always this, because we never perfected the art of, defining or even determining our monsoon sort of thing. And most of India is monsoon dependent agriculture based. It's not river fed or dam fed, unlike many other countries. So therefore, even if the monsoon fails, there is still enough irrigation potential. But most of us, 90 or 70%, if you take the latest statistics from Socham and others, is still monsoon fed. And we have never been able to, despite this knowledge, we have never sort of invested in finding out or predicting or trying to bring it to a level of correct, let's say, reliability, where the confidence levels of the data produced or the inferences produced are very high. If they say it will rain to this level after 3 months, people should be able to believe it. But that sort of confidence have never been established in all over these 280 quarterly data points that meteorological department has also produced. So assumption errors were very, very high. Then scope error, where your project is outside the scope. That means if it is not, it's not going to fit into your model, then you have chosen the wrong model for your project. Or you are not looked at enough models that will suit your particular product. Because such a model never existed. When the Three Gorges Dam was to be built in China, there was no, enough model for the fellows, the Chinese engineers, to compare, saying what will be the impact. So what did they do? They took the largest single dam and then replicated it 3 times. The Aswan Dam in India was one of the models they took to find out what happened, and so on and so forth. They took each one of these large dams and then found out what happened, and then built their model based on that, saying this is how we need to build these dams, and this is what is going to happen if certain things went wrong, and this is the probability of that going wrong. Or even if it went right, what had to be done? How do you discharge the water? What will happen downstream? And so on and so forth. So if you did not do that, what will happen is your project will still remain within. So you can see between the 3 classifications of error, or the very large, high-level classifications of error, how closely they are internet, so that your model building will be correct. And therefore, your estimation of risk will be largely closer to the actual results that will likely to emerge. So what is a model risk? Model risk is where the model itself goes wrong, or model contributes to your assessments going wrong. As we spoke in the beginning, model is supposed to contribute towards quantification of your risk assessments, creating an abstraction of reality to help bring the scenario building into a more valid calibrations. So what could go wrong in this? The model itself could be contributing to that. We will see there have been some classic or fantastic or actually catastrophic examples of this risk. Very recently, China was in the risk of one of the 3 main dams, going kaput. That means the dam breaching, not breaching, actually bursting out. So it would have, instead of creating that sort of power, it would have wiped them out. Luckily for them, and luckily for most of our northeastern states, because the resulting outflow would have come and hit our Brahmaputra. Luckily, it held. The monsoon held, and it was anything. Anyway, coming back to our session, what is a model risk? Where a financial model itself goes wrong, is inadequate or adverse. Therefore, your performance and the risk on the other side, you are not even able to explain what went wrong, because you don't know what went wrong in the particular model, because you have done all the very many steps or the process. You have ticked every box in choosing the right model, and finally, when you find out the results are different, and when you did a root cause analysis, you found out because your decisions were based on the model that produced a wrong result. And when you do a root cause analysis on that and find out because the variables are itself wrong, or the assumptions were wrong, and so forth, which earlier passed the test of scrutiny. And so a model risk is something can happen, particularly where algorithms are very complex. This can happen. And Today, most of the models are off-the-shelf models. That means what we call OTS models. That means we don't even construct. In an Excel, you at least in the initial stage when I told you about a model based on Excel sheet, you sit down and write your, formula. So if there is a syntax error, it will say there's a, formula error. You will go back, do a review. If you can't review it yourself, you will call a friend or an expert. He will do the review and saying, "Yaar, you closed this bracket earlier. Usko nikal do, theek ho jata hai." So something like that. So here there is no such possibility also because it's off the shelf. It is a pre-built model. Even graver is going to be the days where the machine learning is teaching, the AI to build its own algorithm based on certain things. This is how robotics works. So there, you don't even know what is the latest algo that is working there to produce a particular model or an output or an outcome. So therefore, this is a big model risk that can happen. I'm not advocating we should not use them. I'm saying this is how it can go wrong. So it can, and this model will be based on a long-term perspective. Your review and other things could be short-term or vice versa, and so on and so forth. So a model risk is a very real thing. In fact, when Dr. Rakesh, the Secretary General, was talking to me, one of the biggest issues of model is the model itself. Remember that. So model risk is a model does not reflect the real world correctly. I told you in the beginning. You'll have to do an abstraction of the reality. If the abstraction of the reality itself is wrong, that means your reality perception in your mind is wrong. And therefore, the abstraction of that is, even if the abstraction process is correct and the scenario building was correct or strong or valid, because of the initial reading was wrong, it will also be wrong. Or initial reading was correct, the abstraction process went wrong, it went, let us say, what the word we use in Hindi is bindas, then it will be like a movie. It will take care of all the essential scenarios that you wanted for a particular outcome only, isn't it? Finally, it has to end happily, otherwise nobody will go watch the movie sentimentally. So it cannot reflect the correct world or the real reality. So that is that's the biggest attribute of a model risk. So it's inherent to the use of all models where abstractions are there. In fact, modeling itself is only abstraction of reality. As I always, this is something that I read even as an youngster and I have never forgotten. I use it repeatedly because I want all risk managers to understand that modeling is not a solution. Modeling is only a tool. If you think modeling will solve your problems, you'll be very, let me say, disturbed with your findings in real life later on. Though I wish it doesn't happen, but that's the reality. Because model is not a panacea. Modeling will help you probably take a better route to validate a few things. And it's a widely accepted tool, so why not we use it, right? So good models capture the essential features. What is a good model? A tested model. The COVID testing that is used worldwide today is almost standard, whether you go and land up in Frankfurt or when you come back and land up in Delhi, this testing kit is almost now standardized. So a model that the results that come out of that particular model is now tested and the fault rates of, within acceptable levels. Not to say it won't have fault rates, it will have fault rates. And it is within acceptable level. That means the positive, the correct rates are very, very high for you to accept the model. So it captures the essential features and helps us understand the empirical relationship. So flawed models, of course, obviously ignore these things. The one thing that can build a flawed model, you can do a question that arises, how can they build a flawed model? I'll tell you something. A flawed model always will be built when there is pressure on time. Boss, I need this tomorrow. Nobody can build a model in that sort of pressure and then run the data past that and then give the results to look at what possible or potential outcomes could be for decision making. Somewhere or all over these places, people are going to go wrong. Why? Because you don't even have time to validate your model. You don't have even time to the same because of the narrowness of the objective or the entire environment of the objective. These things can, or the wrong parameters can be chosen. Are usko chhod do. You genuinely overlook, or you very, the word there should not be misunderstood, where you deliberately overlook certain values. You don't want to include them. So then, obviously, the results will be different because you have decided what you want. This is another type of risk When you subclassify model risk, we'll come to this sort of thing. Cherry picking. There's a big problem with, when various options are available, people tend to choose the option that will suit them than it will suit the model. Therefore, it will be between two risk managers. We have seen this emerging in Standard Chartered Bank in our own experience. The earlier guy used a particular type of distribution analysis, and the next guy who came in did why? Because during his college days, he was a major, player in that particular thing, and he liked only that model. So the entire decision-making process, we started change, and when audit, when we went and started questioning it, this was an experience, real life experience. And this is very real, I can tell you from my own personal experience. So parameter values can change because of issues like that. So understanding the model risk. So first of all, we had to understand where is model risk itself sitting in the overall thing. In most of the organizations today, it has been, most of the industries also, it has been today accepted after a lot of deliberations. When I say a lot of deliberations, almost 15, 20 years of deliberations in some cases, which were found to be, superfluous, but it happened. So, because if a financial modeling happens, is it a finance risk? Or because the decisions that were taken was because of a faulty model, was it an operational risk? So these sort of questions started arising because they were being applied in different areas. In your supply chain management, your stocking levels were based on a model, and suddenly you found you're running out of an essential stock spare part, or you're having excess inventory which is costing you a lot of storage costs, carrying costs. So what did you attribute that wrong decision to? When you do the root cause analysis, you found out that the models that were throwing out various scenarios were giving you wrong results based on which certain decisions were being taken or being built into your policies. And therefore, when it was understood as a model-based risk and labeled as a model risk, now where do you park it? And therefore, what risk response do you do to it? Became a big question. And finally, today, most of the risk management environment have agreed to classify it as a part of or a subset of operational risk. Now, why is it very important? Because the operationalization, I'm sorry for this, complex word which actually means nothing. Operationalization of a particular process can create a risk, and that's what is going on there. So a model per se will only work as well as you built it, as well as you're using it. Both of these are part of operations, though your objective is probably not part of what you would call operations. So its implementation is where it is considered to be a subset that creates and uses the model. So your creation and using, even if it is done in the production department or in your marketing department and so on and so forth, or in your finance risk or your credit risk or market risk in bank or finance industry, the creation and the using of it is the operation part of that particular function, and therefore it has been. Now traders and investors use this model. It's a huge risk if your your price determination models throw up a huge risk consistently or by throwing wrong value, and your trades will be done based on those decisions or those pointers. So you could be overstretched, you could be ahead of the market, or even not exploit any of the opportunities that are emerging, both of which are financial loss on the table on the end of the day. So can affect valuation of your MTM, your mark-to-market components for which you have to provide for at the end of the day. If your valuation is wrong, then your debit to your P&L will damage your institution's view in the eyes of the investors and other business analysts. So therefore, as simple mistake as for want of a horseshoe, as the poet wrote, for want of a horseshoe, you may lose your reputation. So it can incorrectly predict the probability. Many places have been used, and people have bitten, let's say, dust. Even large airlines like Southwest Airlines and all in US, where they were not able to predict the probability of a particular, passenger turning out to be a problem passenger. Let me use the word problem passenger than this thing, because the models that were used were either incomplete or biased or both, or so on and so forth. So you have to understand the model. The figure on the right tells you what is model risk management framework itself. Many of the organizations understand this and then build a framework for their policies, saying a model will never get implemented unless the model is tested and approved in our environment. That means, yes, somebody can tell you, hey, bhai, there is a good model there, why don't you adopt it? That's good information, market information. You bring that information, bring that tool, bring that possible model into your environment, but don't apply it immediately. You test it to your own environment, to your own data, to your own capabilities, to your own resources, and see how much of it will work for you in the manner you want it. And then you go ahead for presenting it for various approval processes to get it implemented in a system. So model risk management framework basically is an outcome of understanding model risk. An organization that is mature enough to understand that this is why most of the model organizations today, before they introduce a model, there is a degree of check that is astounding, that even a particular product launch doesn't go through. So that sort of rigor and discipline helps them to reduce the event. Will it eliminate the risk of using a wrong model? No. Will it reduce the risk? Oh, certainly yes. So therefore, it is better to at least bring it down to a level saying I'm using 100 different models for 100 different objectives. One of them is bound to go wrong. And as long as it's not in my critical areas, whereas like your investment portfolio or your production thing or your quality control, for example, that means whatever happens, even if there is a faulty product, it will never go see the light of day in the market because it will be caught at the quality control, and your quality assessment models will be completely tamper-proof, error-proof, whatever other proofing you want to do, and so on and so forth. These will be built into your model risk management framework. As you understand. So this is what understanding of model risk is very, very important. You have various components in this. As you can see, it is a predefined model it's an imported data from another source. So this can vary organization to organization. That's why we are not going into looking at the various components, because once you understand model risk management framework, a framework is what implements a policy. A policy is a strategic direction a company or an organization wants to take for a particular achievement of a particular objective. So once you understand that this is what I want to do with my models, okay, or this is what my model should do for me, then you will put in a framework and you will say, okay, this is how I'll do it. Now, what components you will have in that is dependent on your organizational rigor and discipline. Even if you are producing it or manufacturing it for the first time, making it, drawing it up for the first time in an organization for yourself, you will be able to, once you have the concept ready, then the components, there are no hard and fast rule. There is no ISO guideline to tell you it should have 14 classes and all that. At least not yet. Okay. So understanding model is a very simple version of reality. As they say, keep it simple. While we said abstraction, we used all big sort of terms so far. Keep that abstraction into simple. Therefore, that's why some of the reality shows are very nice. Okay, why there is no scripting done. Except probably they are told, please be decent in what you talk. Even if you don't agree with the other guy, be as, polite as possible. But this is what we do even in a non-TV show. So that's why a reality show is different from a scripted show. So you keep it simple. Keep it simple. And of course, oversimplification sometimes may start leading to complete people ignoring you. What he says, I already know. Uska jarurat kya? So oversimplification runs that risk. That doesn't mean you make it a bit complex, but you should know where to cut down your simplification. That's what I'm trying to say. So any model is a simplified version of your reality, right? And so that the risk there, you will never fail to account for a risk. You should try to build a scenario level where almost all possible scenario, risks are captured. What if there is a new risk? Yes, they will always stand outside. That's what COVID was. That's what Nassim Taleb very famously told. In his book about even 10, 12 years back, saying it's even called a black swan. Even there, what did he say? A black swan will exist. It will be very surprising for somebody to see a black swan in a flock of white geese, swan, right? So that's what he said. He never said there will never be a black swan. So you will still miss out things, but you try to reduce it. The more simple you keep it, the more, scenarios you will be able to build into it. So assumptions have to be made to develop a model. Inputs can vary widely. So therefore, you should be able to look at the classification or categorization of inputs and try to bring it at the headline value so that subsets can be built in as more and more, degree of fineness have to be built into it. What is called finesse. Okay. Use of financial models have been very prevalent from decades. It has been there. It's not like as if it's basically projections. Financial projections for 5 years is you are having a model. This is what you say. Today, I want to start an industry. 5 years from today, this is how it will look like. And my production capacity is to produce 100 tons a day. I am by the time my maturity and the machine will be working, I will be able to produce more than 100 tons, and my error rate will come down. So therefore, 98 tons will always be saleable, whatever projections you do. So this has been in use for ages. Nothing as it came now. Only thing, the tools that we use today have made the ability to use it far more widespread, far more easier, and therefore far more riskier. The more people use something, the more risky it is. Remember that. It's like a crowd, right? Yeah. So because you have computing power today, you have storage power. That means data can be stored for any amount of time and retrieved. And today, even analytical tools are so high that you have to just spell out. In fact, some of the analytical decisions come from the results you see. That means analysis is already done. You then get to choose, okay, what is the methodology you use to get this result? You give me that analytical tool. So people are now choosing from the result instead of choosing for the result. So that sort of availabilities are there. Before developing a model, you'll have to conduct a forecast. The forecast is what do you want to do? How are you going to do it? What are the various pitfalls? Exactly like your risk assessment planning. Then, we even have a model risk officer in a particular bank. They had a model risk officer, not today. 1996, even when we were working. And in a particular engagement of saying, he was invited to come and talk to us. And about 8 to 10 years later, I understood what he told us that day. Because it was so highly complex. And such a complex role was already assigned to a particular specific officer in that bank, a German bank. Right? So model risk officers, that means a particular senior functionary is given a role to look at what are the various models being used by his organization. Similar, I was told, because Germans use a lot of data, they have good number crunches and all that. And most of the production facilities in Germany use a testing platform to test any model before it is even adopted by others, and so on and so forth. So this level of maturity is our understanding in model risk even those days, when it was not so widespread practice. So components, you need to have a governance policy. A model is great from a technical side. A model is great from its objective setting, from the data you need to plan for it, the planning for and getting the data, removing the noise from the data, cleansing the data, extracting it, and then running it through a particular set of rules, which is called algorithms and other things, to get the output and then use the output to do your decision making, comparisons, or whatever else is the decisions. For all this is fine. This is how the model works, and therefore it has its own risks, as we said. But if there is no governance around this, then it will be disc-emerging. Every different, or if the organization is adopting 2 different models on the same day, and 2 different teams are, working on these things, they'll be doing it according to their own whims and fancies, or their limitations, or their knowledge levels, and so on and so forth, or all of this. So a model governance would help, saying, this is how my company, my organization would handle models. This is what we will do. This is how we will test it. This is how we'll actually roll it out. And therefore, since it might be system-based, and most of the times it is always system-based, it will then go through your change management and all the other normal disciplines. And somewhere this, interconnection is going to kick in. And therefore, the governance policies and practices have to be very clearly lined. Otherwise, no matter how good your model is, it is going to be a sore thumb, or it will be sticking outside your systems without an ability to integrate itself into your system. So that will be the big problem. So it involves assigning roles in the individuals. People should understand when a new model is being used, what are the objectives. You can't have a secret model run by all people in the world. If you are having a secret investment decision that a company has to do, then you better limit it knowledge, its application, its actual working only to that group. But if you want it to be applied at your dealing desk, but you won't tell them for what it is using, he'll be applying it as another thing because he's not involved in that and he doesn't know why he is using it. He's got another 10 things to do, so he'll go click on that also. So we better involve people, assign the roles and results. And there may be genuinely some reasons why you don't want to involve everybody. Need to know basis, fair enough. Then you limit it only to that group of people who are willing, the CFO, CRO, maybe the CEO and the audit committee or whatever, investment committee or the board. That's sort of very limited thing because sometimes major investment decisions may be involved where you don't want the news to leak out or anything like that. And therefore, you limit it only to a particular group. Fine. But then, if their roles and responsibilities are not defined, then that model will anyway not serve its purpose. Why? Because each one of them will be doing it according to what they think that part of that elephant is. So origin of model risk started the day when people realized that the decisions that they are making is wrong based on that model. Model risk didn't start with the day models were used. Model risk came from the time people started understanding that decisions made on a particular models were not always right. And there are any number of instances globally for, this thing. One of the biggest models that people always say in these sort of stories is why Napoleon lost that one particular war when he has been winning every single war before that was because they used a particular model of, because their opponents were English and this English had the, particular way of starting the day. In those days, if you remember, the war was fought only during daylight. So once the sun set, both the armies will go back, like our cricket teams, they will go back. There won't be any war. Not like war at night, night vision glasses and all that. Those things, were not there. They're not required also. Now, the model they used was the English will, have their breakfast and then only start their war. So somebody was waiting to see those smoke come out of the British tents, whereas they didn't come. The reason it didn't come out on that particular day morning was because they were having unsmoked salmon or whatever that was. Okay, so they didn't have to light their fires. So they were using a particular model which didn't work, or the data that came out of it didn't work. So a model, or that day, when they realized that the decision, or people and historians dissected the reasons for Napoleon's failure, when they were able to, this is not very popular, this is one of the reasons, probably it's an anecdote that's used in risk management. But anyway, let me share that with you. Here's there when they found out a model was used which didn't work, or the model was wrong, or they did not take enough scenarios built into it. What if they did not light a fire? Or what if they lit a fire but made sure that the smoke did not come out? So these were the questions these were the errors which allowed you, which actually brought out the realization that your model could be wrong. Till that time, people are thinking, oh, no, nothing is wrong with my model. My model is perfect. It is God's given gift. It's only the other environmental factors that went wrong. So this where the origin of models is. So in the basic flowchart that we'll see in the next thing, next slide, you'll see. A model itself is built to look at a set of assessments constituting the scope of what the model can bring. So represented by data sets and information that goes into the computation. So the algorithm represents the transformation. It means you have an input data, you want it to go through a particular set of transformation. This is what in Excel we do. If you give an if command, if this is the value, if cell C is 0, then you do this. If cell C has got a value greater than 1 or 1 equal or greater than 1, then you do this, whatever. We go type these things and then we make sure the syntax is correct. What is the application doing? It is transforming it. So it becomes the engine of changing the data from one form into another form as per desired inputs. So that is the algorithm that represents a set of combination. It can be something as simple as I just gave you on an Excel sheet, or it could be complex where you need a Python or whatever else the new name is, the latest language, to go write it down. It could be a separate complex project by itself, which creation of that algorithm. So most of the space launches and other things, they work on such complex. Your remote surgery today works on such algorithms because the decisions have to be immediate. It has to take the data, transform the data into a data point, and then convert it into a decision, and then take the process the next step, all within the same whatever time frame or nanoseconds or connectivity frame or whatever, and so on and so forth. So that's what it transforms. So once that happens, mathematical concepts happen, then the results are applied, after which you will have to apply it for the depending on the scope. It is not as if it can, because the modern day technology says you don't have to do that, because that itself, application itself, can be built up as a part of your model building. I can teach my models to do. That's why a robo, doll or a man or a dog or whatever, you should see some of the fantastic videos that Boston Robotics and others are putting it on web to understand what is the development in those things. It is able to look at a wall in front of us and decide whether it should turn around or climb the wall. And then it is able to estimate the height of the wall, and then finds out that it has no capacity to reach the top, and therefore it turns and comes away. So when they lower the wall, it is able to arrange itself, its model. That means the output is converted into a decision. So that's what they are now saying. We don't have to give you. Earlier model was you give in data input, you built an engine which you call algorithm or a set of rules to convert it to a particular output, and then you use the output to take a decision whether I need to launch this product or change the wrapper from red to green, because now I am going to launch it in the Islamic world where green is more a religious color, so on and so forth. Today the model itself will tell you to do that. So it does the decision making also on its own. So therefore the risk also is now changing. Earlier the risk is your interpretation of the data could be wrong. Now it could be a part of the model's interpretation itself, therefore. So while the advancement in technology and other things are helping you do a few things, or helping you achieve in doing a few things, that itself is also creating a risk plotter for you to look at how many times it has gone wrong, and therefore what do I do? Do I take it at that point and proceed further, or look at another validation process outside of it and then see whether to go ahead or not? So these are various controls that are now being built into that sort of experiences that are coming up. So if you look at this flow, if you look at it from the real system at the left-hand top side, you take the real system or real data or real requirement, and you look at the experiments you want to do. Do I launch this product? You probably will start a small product test launch or dipstick launch or whatever, or you look at your past data and then your experimental results and you keep it aside. Then now you make a model. The model system has some simulations. Simulation converts some results. Or you construct an approximates and then you do some theoretical predictions. Now you have two different values. One is where you compare and improve the model, or you compare and improve your theory. That means you go back and change your scope of your model, the data sets that you want, the data points you want, the data engine algorithm changes that you want, and therefore you're this thing. That means in another way, you are now creating a different model or a version 2 of your model, and so on and so forth. So this is basically a very simplified, very high level flow chart that is normally used almost everywhere. You will find this. This is not my construction. I didn't construct this. Okay. You will find this so commonly used, and therefore it is so popular. Why? Because very simple. You can apply it to any industry, you want to do it only for your desk in your particular department. You could still use this. And you will find it so easy to, it can scale up, it can scale down. So this model, this flow chart is normally what is used in most of the modeling this thing. Most of the textbooks you will find the same theory or various versions of the same thing. So basic structure of the model, this is what I was telling you. If you look at the diagram there, basic model scope, then you decide, based on that, you decide what the inputs are. And then there is the kinetics, which is the method in the system, which is your engine, which produces the output, which allows you to use the model for what? Comparative purpose, decision-making purpose, whatever else. So and so on and so forth. So basically, if you put an English to that, you come to this side. Kinetics represents a set of transformation of the computation. That means the fellow in the middle is the fellow who actually converts the entire data that you have chosen or you have defined or you have set as your target data, and he converts it for the type of outputs. Convert all these things, extrapolate, or use this. If cell value 0, what will happen? If it is more than 1, what will happen? If this happens, so on. Because that depends on the type of various scenarios. If it rains in September, what will happen? If it rains below the normal, so you then define the normal. Then you define another data set that will capture the actual values, and then which will create the variation. If the delta is above 15%, then you ask a particular type of transformation, and so on and so forth. So who builds these kinetics? Kinetics is built upon the scope of your model. Or if you already have a pre-plan, for example, a product developer could come and tell you, sir, I have a model that can tell you how many of your KYC documents for a bank particularly are, fraudulent. In the sense, they are not original, this thing people, say. He could probably have an algorithm that could find out if they are, for various data points, he could have built this thing. So he will run it past and say, please pull out so much samples from this particular set of data or set of data and check for its correctness or not. So that's what you will use. So output will come down like this. So you could have a pre-built algorithm depending on what is industry use. Most of pharmaceutical set testing, especially today, where that's why pharma products you are able to launch. Earlier, it used to take 20-25 years because the testing was done on real people, and they used to be administered the original sample, and they used to wait for 20 years to see what the reactions were, what happened to the children they gave birth to, and so on and so forth. People volunteered for this. They were paid salaries and all that. You would have read about all that. Today, it's not required. Today, you don't have to wait. There is no 20-year turnaround time. Nobody can wait for that long. So what is happening there? They are not shortening the production system of humans and all that. What they are doing is they are using database sampling to find out what has happened in the past, and they're able to crunch it. That's why people are talking about COVID vaccine coming on to production by, already the production has started in some of the areas, and for public use by January, it will come out. So even if the number of cases are increasing, since the vaccine will be available, it can be controlled mostly by summer next. So therefore, it will not be like the Spanish flu or whatever. It took the toll of people. Imagine if 50% of the population of Spain or a country like that get wiped away. Imagine what will happen to their factory production, sales of their supermarkets and all that. 50% of your consumers also will go away. So therefore, it's very important to use a model for various other decision making. So kinetics is that transforms the set of data to includes a method and structures, mathematical concept, what sort of distribution you use. This is what I was telling you. Basic concept of mathematics and statistics is very, very important. Very, very important. So people who already have it, please build on it. People who think they are not yet strong, no problem at all. It's always good time to start today. If you ask me when is the best time to start it today. Go back to your books, go back to your fundamentals. And there are very good sources today, statistics.com and all, where it is actually broken down. Join in LinkedIn. I'm sure all of you are on LinkedIn. Go join the blogs, especially in statistics and other things. Some of the younger generation students, the type of decomposing they're doing to some of the earlier theories is amazing. I'm now following two youngsters, one young gentleman from Saudi Arabia who is now settled in US, working for a company there. One young lady based in our own Bangalore. Both of them talking about Bayesian networks and all that. It's just, I had a very, very good statistics lecturer in my college days, foundation days, and I used to feel very proud. But these people have taken it to a completely different level, and amazing. And at 63, 64, I am one of their probably awestruck students today. So it is never late to learn. So what I'm saying is very important for us to understand. When you say this step includes structures with mathematical concepts, it's very easy for me to make this 45-minute presentation to you and go. But you guys are going to use it in your work situation. So you need to have that basic understanding, because it's not important as to what is right. Excuse me. In a discussion like this, I'm sorry. It's not important to, It's not important to discuss which of the distribution is correct or not, because that will depend on the type of data, type of dot model. But what important is for us to understand how these basics, right, involve sets of results obtained. What is the results are obtained? I'll give you an example here. When I was learning about penetration testing and all that in my cyber security and other things. I wanted to find out how to do this testing. I done all the theory part of it. So during my working career, this was not a very highly known concept. So I had never either done or seen it done. So I thought I will set up a LAN in my own working area. So my son, my daughter-in-law, my daughter, myself, all the laptops, I connected them together, made a LAN, then tried a penetration testing. It worked very well because the tool is free. It's open source. You even have a video that explains how to use it for you. So you ran the test. Test was successful. The results came out, right? I had no idea what to do with the result. Why? Because I was not trained to read the results. Now, why am I telling you the story here? You have structure. If you use this particular analogy that I'm telling you of my experience, you may build a good model. You may have the correct data set or tools. You may have the correct kinetics. And you ran the model. The output came as the penetration testing results, as in my case. But you have no use of that model because you don't know how to read it. And this can happen to your model also if you don't know how to read the model outputs. So therefore, your kinetics, your statistics, and your techniques, tools and techniques is not just at the formulation of the kinetics, out the results. If it came out in plain English said, South, the growth is expected to be at 15%, everybody will understand. What if it said, table A will generate 15% more? And people did not have an understanding of what table A generated or what the data set table A meant or contained or what it means or what was the transformation of the table A. So therefore, we should be able to bring it out to a comprehensive level. Who does that? The model owner has to do it. The risk manager who is looking at the model, who you are all trying to now qualify as one, has to be able to say, hey, your model is able to produce the results, but is the result being used or useful? If it is not being used, most of the reasons is because it's useless, because it doesn't make any sense to anybody, right? So to complete my own story, I went to a friend and he told me, you should have first studied about that. If you use this tool, what would be the output and how do you read those output? How do you make value of the output? You didn't do that step. So that was a big learning for me. So not just how do you apply a particular model, what are the various outputs that could produce if you use a particular type of data, and therefore how to read it. So this completes a logical application of our knowledge. So your knowledge level should be not just at the beginning to design, but at the end also to convert the design into meaningful data for others, not everybody. Because for them, I had given it to IT earlier. Where was I in my area when I said, my Zamana, when I said there was no penetration testing, as it was not being attacked. It was being attacked. But the technology guys used to take care, the hardcore techie guys. And we guys used to take comfort in saying, acha, wo technology log dekh lete. So that should not happen. Today, and you should be, you're the technology guy as a risk manager technology, So modeling process, again, this is a process flow for what we saw 2-3 slides back. If you look at this slide in front of you and look at this slide, this is nothing but the modeling process, exactly the same thing. You take the real problem and you simplify it and check what you want. And then you find a model, use the mathematical product to see whether it is solved. If not, go back and look at whether a different model will work or if your problem is the same. In the root cause analysis in Standard Chartered Bank, we used to have, where I worked, we used to have a rule in those days, I hope it's still there, is if by the third W, you did not get the, to get to the root of the cause, you're asking the wrong set of questions. The normal belief was 5 W's, isn't it? 5 times Y. Our rule was by the third Y, if you're not got to the bottom of the case, that means you're asking the wrong set of questions. So go back to your drawing board, come back with a different set of questions. That used to be the level of, perfection that they would want even those days. So this is the way models are built, or how we build models to, achieve our original objective. So import data. The entire modeling process will not work without data. You could analyze any type of data, voice, hybrid, only numerical data, or, big data, anything. But without data, modeling will not work, whether today on systems or even the manual days, where we were doing manual days, mostly it was financial projections, and so on and so forth. And we have done sensitivity analysis when I started my career in 1980 with State Bank of India. What we know as sensitivity analysis for a product range of about 113 versions of deposits. What will happen if there is a 0.25 or what is called 25 basis points change in this thing? All manually on graph sheets and other things. Anyway, without data, even in the manual process, you can't do any modeling. So quantitative assessment, that's why we call it quantitative assessment, because data. But data here should not be seen as an absolute. It's not an absolute at all. Why? Data in its own form has no meaning. Data has to be transformed into a form where it can be used. So data has to be stripped of all this thing. It has to be put into a particular format and so on and so forth. All sorts of data, quality management will have to come into that to make it available for the particular use that you're going to, or available so that it is applicable, as we say. Make it available in a form so that it is applicable. For applicable parameters, there are certain rules, which is where you bring it into the availability, stripping it of various things, various format deficiencies, various unnecessary deficiencies. You will have Sridhar.Kalyansundaram. In some other way, it will be Sridhar space Kalyansundaram. In some other place, it will be Sridhar Kalyansundaram. Now, in all these three values, you will say the name of the customer. But this data are three different data, and therefore it will be this thing. We know now, this is probably we have used this particular example 1,000 times. But the importance of this example cannot be taken away. That means, without that particular cleansing of the data, they will still remain three distinct data sets. So they will have to be brought into one or a different type of this thing. Again, then how is the data itself kept? Your relational data where Sridhar is stored separately, Kalyansundaram is stored separately, and for any combination of Sridhar Kalyansundaram, you pull it out from two different addresses. In suddenly it is of Sridhar Kalyansundaram, it is Sridhar Kalyana Raman. Then it will go take it from a different data set and so on and so forth. So, importance of data also is not enough to say how I understand importance of data. I understand how data itself is structured, how data itself is formatted, how data itself is collated, how data itself is stored, how data itself is transmitted. So, how data at every stage is bringing the same or consistent value for that particular application I use. So, that is how this importance to modeling has to be understood. So, you have a logical data modeling, that's what I spoke to you, process model, data requirements. Then you have a physical data model, which is the technical requirements and performance requirements. That means all the North Delhi or North Indian states. Now then you'll have to predefine what is north of Delhi or what constitutes northern part of Delhi and so on and so forth. So we'll have to define these things at the logical level. Then when you come to the physical data, then finally when you arrive at this physical data model, then what is the business objective for which you are using this data and you bring the data down. So this is when you look at the various stage of refining the data or identifying the data and then looking at various process requirements that will require a type of consistencies or a formatting efficiencies or whatever else, and then building into a physical data modeling where you have the actual data at an extractable level and available for whatever analysis for the tool that you are going to deploy or employ. So evaluation of models. Which model is the best model? Or which of the various options in front of me is the best model? These are the evaluations you do. One is post-use, one is pre-use. When you say which of the models are the best models, you have made all the four models run and then say, Acha, TK, I like this result better than that. This is like going to the second doctor and taking a confirmation that you are COVID affected. So this is which of the two models? Where do I look at a single parameter or a double parameter? So these are the two things that will happen. Okay. Implementation of the framework. I told you, if you don't have a framework deciding how it will be bindas. If you are only once going to take a model for one project, it is fine. But if it is consistently you are going to use, which is what most organizations do today, you better have a framework. So how do I build a framework? And this is not something that came in suddenly today out of the blue in 2020. It's been there even in 1997, which is almost 23 years back. So it's fairly a dated concept. For somebody to put it into a method of work, probably the research started even before. So they've been there. So what do you want? Look at this implementation framework. What is the perspective? If it is the methodology perspective, okay, what are your goal setting guidelines? What is your organization? Now you read, on the row, the horizontal plane, you will see what is your goal setting, what is your, organization dimension, what is your schedule dimension, what is the model dimension, what do you want as a modeling guideline, then what is the data guidelines, then what is your process guidelines that will actually implement it, then who is the role, who plays the role. So business perspective, who gives the business, what is the business perspective, who brings in the architecture, okay, and so on and so forth. So now this is how do you build it. So one answers, if you look at the last row at the bottom of that, one brings in why, the organization dimension says who, the schedule says when, the model says how, data says what, and process says where. So these are the questions that are answered. And it is not done yet. If you then go to the methodology, then each one of these methodologies again have the same question in the last row. But if you look at goals, it then tells you how to set each one of them. Develop and implement the goal. Then look at the same goal for architecture. Develop and implement the architecture. What is an architecture? It's a diagrammatic. What's the architecture for your house, your flat, your building in which your office is working? The set of drawings that tells you which will be where. So if you plan that and if you build it, it will be according to what you want to remain. Otherwise, it will be according to what the mason wanted. Right? So you build an architecture. And then which system will it run on? Will it be compliant? Is it going to be a standalone system or is it going to be a built-in embedded system and so on and so forth? Then operating. Certain of the models are an embedded system like your treasury operations, most of it. So these two documents are very important documents, even where if your organization did not have it, or even if they already have it, to see whether it follows this. Most of the mature organizations follow one or more variants of the same basic data plane. So it has 5 different or distinct stages. You initiate a model, then you develop the model, then you validate the model, then you implement the model, and then you use the model. You see, there is a difference. Implementing and using. Implementation is not using. So what do you do there? You do the testing, you do the user testing and all that and see whether it meets your objective. And then you bring it down to use. So we need to understand how these stages itself sort of define what are the various risks that can happen if you straight away you initiated a model and let's say we were cut through all of these things because we don't want to do the model development, validation and implementation because well tested. Everybody in the USA is using it. So I will initiate it in my company and straight away go to using. Then you are running the risk of these things being not working. It may work, it may not work. You do not know till it fails and so on. So challenges, like everything else, is the accuracy. Overall accuracy hinges on the validity of the model. Is this the right model? Okay. I want to play cricket very well. Who is your model? Sachin Tendulkar. Is that the right model? Why don't you be your batting coach? He is there to correct your mistakes. Mr. Tendulkar will not be there or probably may not be available all the time to correct it. So challenges with the models you choose could be something good. It could be a very high level thing. I mean, I want a Nobel Prize winner in mathematics to guide me on mathematics so that I don't mistake. We will see one of those problems in the coming thing. We're running short of time. So we need to. So challenges exist with everything as we have been talking all this while. It's not as if models are a panacea. So as they say, one of the biggest challenges is to pick it up, take the data. Look at this cartoon as it looks. Is this your machine learning system? He says, yes, I pour all my data into this and into the pile of linear algebra and collect the result on the other side. So this guy still asks, what if the answers are wrong? Then he says, I go on doing it till I get my correct answer. It means the answer I want. This is the problem with the model. You can go on tinkering with the model till you are thinking, Arey, ab mil gaya mere ko. I want what I want. So you already preset on what you want. You are not deciding on the basis of the model. You are making the model validate your decision. This is a very important thing, and this is what normally happens with the model. There is a big risk with the model. So this is, while it is humorous in the way it is depicted, it's unfortunately and very scarily almost the truth. So challenges with the model is the model may be appropriate for one product. What is good for the goose is not good for the gander. I'm taking a cliche completely out of risk management from outside, but please believe me, just because it worked last year, it did not work this year because the data set has completely changed. But we don't realize that. My bank is same, my practices are same, my policies didn't change, my MDs also changed, everybody is same. What we don't understand is customer behavior as described in the various transactions has changed. So model may be appropriate for one type of product, one type of season, one type of application. So it may not be consistent. So in scope might have changed. Fundamentally, all those things will have to be revalidated for us. These are the basic challenges with models. So typical model risks are input and the model and the output. These are the various typical model risks that we'll have at the input level. What are the data definition and all that? Improbable model, improbable, what do you call algorithms, the transformation equations, whatever else. Output, have the correct output, incorrect conclusions, or the incorrect output itself, based on which definitely, garbage in, garbage out sort of thing was probably used to define even the computers long time back, 30, 40 years back. So challenges is when there are 2 or 3 models working, you may be choosing the easiest one. It's called cherry picking. This is one of the biggest problems with models because all the models are built on the same objective. Only thing they will use different algorithms. So you might have the same thing. So you will choose the easiest of them. It's like defining the shortest route between A and B is always a straight line. But a straight line need not be the only route. So while it defines the shortest route, it doesn't define the various other options. So these are the various problems. So challenges is because of the challenges in the model, your real problem and the estimations, you could actually be using a different type of approximation for your solutions. So that could be a big problem with the models. It can be easily identified at the type of setting up the scope itself and including the challenges in the testing part of models. Challenges model, lack of data, all of these rounding off errors, truncation of errors. Rounding off errors is a big problem because in certain areas like Saudi Arabia, even the currency conversion of your dollar, it's got fills which run into a particular thing, but the rounding off rules are different. So if your application is used in your Saudi operations and they use the same thing, you use it in India, where today the paise requirement is not required in your income tax filing and all that. Your rounding of errors could be different, truncation errors, and so on and so forth. So I'm just giving you an idea. It can be much more complex than such simple things. Okay. So benefits. A model helps you to look at every single thing within the data range, whether it is too small or too large. Okay. There are, of course, limitations, right? As we already spoken about it, complex calculations, you may not be having visibility to the complexion, so you do not know. It's like going to the hotel and believing that you would have made everything hygienically. That's all. So you have no idea what he has used. So summing up, model by very nature is simplification of reality. That means your abstraction, you're bringing reality into a simplified form, then you're building a set of data around it, and then running it through a particular process that you believe will throw out certain results based on previous experience of others or academic knowledge or your own intuitions or whatever. Okay. And then you look at how do you use it at the end of the model. Real world, one of the most spectacular failures was this particular company called Long-Term Capital Management. And this happened in 1998, as you can see. The notable failures, there have been many failures. This particular company, please read the last bullet there. It had 2 Nobel Prize winners in its principal shareholders. And they built a model and they were thinking that their model would always beat the, NASDAQ or the, or the Japanese index or anything. It just didn't do it. And one day it spectacularly collapsed. And they lost more than 100 billion of their own and investors' money. Okay. And one of the most spectacular collapses. and made even more spectacular because of the two Nobel Prize winners. So just because you're a mathematical expert, it doesn't mean you'll build the best model, which the other side, the flip side of that is, just because you don't know anything, doesn't mean you can't learn. Okay, you can learn. You need to know the basics, right? One more is very recent now, very recent as in 2012, where they called it the synthetic portfolio, synthetic credit portfolio. They were building up a portfolio, JP Morgan. Okay, and this is in 2012, after the 2008 crash, right? Where they almost lost their shirt. They were even, they would have gone actually very easily between Lehman Brothers and JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs. People in the know that it could have been anyone or all of them, except that Lehman Brothers collapsed. These fellows survived only to repeat it again in 2012 for a different reason. This time it was the models that they blamed. But when it 6.2 billion was luckily something that they could afford. But imagine how many countries will survive a loss like that. Forget companies. So key takeaways, financial models are used extensively. Even today, financial modeling is a very, very common thing. Okay. It presents is wherever insufficient or inaccurate data is used. Okay. It says, quantitative approaches can divert attention. Some of the biggest thing is just because it's numerically provable, the quality of a particular issue may get overridden. That's true. Blind users. Nassim Taleb even wrote in his Black Swan book saying, you become blind users of a model once you start believing in a model. So these are key takeaways for us to keep in mind when we use models in risk and estimation of risk. So in 2019, as recently as 1 year back, 2020, we are not at recovered out of it, right? Is your default probabilities depending on the modeling assumptions. And it could be as different as to 20 to 80%. This is what Deutsche Bundesbank has said. DB, Deutsche Bank. As recently as 2019. So modeling is great, not the panacea. You need to know because you're going to manage it as risk managers. You need to be competent to understand. But and if you know only, you'll be able to identify what models to avoid or what models to use. So any questions I'm willing to take. I'm sorry if I overshot the time, but I thought I should spend the time in bringing the concepts home as closely as possible.
Yeah.
Dr. Rakesh, I hope.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Sridhar, for simplifying this complex topic. So, any questions, please? We are already come to close of the session. So I don't think there is any question. So it was an excellent session, and Mr. Sridhar, you simplified it very easily. And in fact, this was a bit difficult topic, not easy for everyone, but still you made it look very simple. So thanks a lot for the session, and thanks all participants for attending it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for everybody.
And I think you explained so clearly that nobody has questions.
Thank you. But if people want, they can write an email through.
Yeah, definitely. If anybody has questions, you can write a mail. We will help you with that. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Sridhar. Thanks all participants. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.